So we entered the new year, 2024, with a major discovery that the GRA has been authorized and in fact now written to the ECG to start implementation of a 15% VAT on electricity. Many were surprised that this was even something that was on our books. It was actually a law that hasn't been implemented since 2013. Now, as we've seen in the last 24 hours, labor, organized labor, led by the TUC, has begun to sound the war drums, and it's pitched it firmly against the government. They warned that government needs to withdraw this immediately, and they give them 1 week to do so, or they're going to face a wrath. And they've been very blunt about this. There will be an industrial action. They will withdraw their services, and this will mean all workers in the public sector, including nurses, including doctors and teachers, will withdraw their service over 15% VAT on electricity. So is it the killer tax that the workers maintain it is? Let's go through this and emphasize looking also at its potential impact on the average worker. That's what we're going to do tonight. And then we'll sit down for a conversation with the ECG itself, because of course they've been asked to implement this. Are they in a position to do so? And what will that mean for you? As you know, a very important part of this conversation is about this non-Lifeline residential consumption. What does that actually mean? So if you're within the Lifeline bracket, and I'll take some time to break this down, it means that you will not be paying the 15% VAT. But that is just part of the story. The whole story, let's look at that. If you really look at this whole concept of the Lifeline, it's been there for quite some time. And we define this with kilowatt hour. In other words, what you consume, the electricity you consume, and the range within which you consume. If you fall within the certain range, you pay extremely less. The state subsidizes it significantly for you. And so you're a Lifeline. And by the way, the Lifeline consumers are the poorest of the poor in this country. And we've come together as a nation to say, because you're so poor, it is just unconscionable to ask them to pay the same rate and tariff for electricity as, for example, someone like me will pay. Someone like the finance minister will pay. It is just unconscionable. And so we decided that we'll set a ban for them. If they fall within that ban, and this is based on research and data, then they won't pay the standard full cost of electricity. And so we say, if you go to 992, if you consume 50 kilowatts an hour, you are Lifeline. And then we came to 994 and decided that let's expand this band a bit more. Let's bring more people, because we realized that people were outside this bracket who simply cannot afford to pay for electricity. And if they can't pay, they have to pay, and they are not within the bracket. We're pushing them further into poverty. And you know, you really define and see the true character of a nation, that what it does to the poorest and most vulnerable people in the society. And so we expanded it to 10 kilowatts per hour. And then come to 1998, we decided to bring it back down to 50. In other words, again, we decided that, well, maybe the bracket of those who now can't afford to pay, we've done enough for the economy, grown the economy to the point that we've created a bit of wealth. So we've lifted many more people out of poverty. So let's bring it back down to 1998 to 50 kilowatts an hour. That's an argument we can have, whether indeed we achieved this economic transformation and improved people's wealth to the point that justified the reduction to 50. But come to 2022, this current government decides, and this is the smallest margin yet when it comes to those who benefit that we've had in 30 years. That reduction, as you see on your screen here, is something we haven't seen before in terms of reducing it from 50 to 30. Again, the fundamental question is, what was the justification for this reduction? Is it that people within the 50 kilowatt hour bracket who were covered under the Lifeline, many of them had now transitioned from being the poorest of the poor to now being in a position to pay? Is that what informed this? And many will argue that that should be the fundamental consideration. But we've reduced it to 30. But what fundamentally this means is looking at where the economy is, and we know we are facing an economic crisis, the worst of its kind in a generation. So what it means, if you look at all the statistics from the inflation that we currently have, again, historic inflations, the haircuts that we've seen, the depreciation of the city over a period. Of course, we've seen the relative stability. All the economic indicators say we're in an economic crisis. What tends to happen, and if you look at the statistical service, 800,000 people have been pushed into poverty as a result of the economic crisis that we've seen. So the evidence suggests that we haven't grown the base. We haven't grown people from poverty into wealth. That then justifies a reduction in the kilowatt hour. But that's what we've done in 2022. So it is fair to assume that this 30 now that we have, the 30 kilowatt an hour, those who are still Lifeline, the poorest of the poor, will now be left to pay the full cost of electricity. So that's the first fundamental point that we need to appreciate. That because we've reduced it, there's still people who used to be there from the 1998 to 2000 who we've defined as a country as the poorest of the poor, so don't pay the full cost for electricity. Because we reduce it, that group, a significant amount, because if you look at it, we nearly halved the bracket, the Lifeline bracket. We nearly halved it from 50 to 30. So there's a significant group here who historically have struggled to pay, who still remain here. So that's the first point. They are now paying full cost, just like me, the poorest of the poor, paying the same electricity bill as myself, as a finance minister, as everybody else, of course, who claim to be middle class. In addition to that, is when you now begin to factor in the 15%, then you begin to appreciate the possible impact, right? Now, if you look at the previous bill, when you compare it to the Lifeline bracket, the consumption per month was 50, 0 to 50. If you consume that, you are going to be paying, in real monetary terms, 12 cedis, 40 pesos. That's Lifeline. So you see that now you begin to appreciate the amount. Then you can hopefully afford to pay this, right? Under the current tariff regime, and according to the PURC, if you're within 0 to 50, the maximum you should be paying a month is 19 cedis, 26 pesos. And the thinking is that the poorest of the poor in this country should afford this. And if you listen to the TUC, they say, if you're within that bracket, all you have in your home currently will be 2 bulbs and a television set. That is the TUC's point of view. And again, this is just to give you a picture of what the poorest of the poor look like when it comes to electricity consumption. If you also then go to the World Bank's own definition, that majority of Ghanaians, however, fall outside the 50 kilowatt an hour bracket. And so we fall in this range. So possibly many of you, vast majority of those who are watching me tonight, will fall within this particular bracket. Again, if you go below this, then you are in Lifeline. And that is the point that we're making, right? So we've reduced it to 30. But the World Bank says majority will be in this bracket of our consumers are between 51 to 30. And that's the bracket that, of course, you will pay up to 15. But there is a significant majority now that we reduce to 30, who will still remain poorest of the poor, right? Is it fair to ask them to pay the full cost of electricity and then add a 15% on top of it? I want to take you to another dimension when you begin to analyze the impact of the 15%. Is the household dimension. And I'm talking about the compound house dimension. I grew up in a compound house, so I know this. They have 1 meter, 1 prepaid meter, typically. Now, many houses, many units on that particular piece of land, and we have all these ramshack roofing sheet houses on one small piece of land, but they have 1 prepaid meter. What that means is that consumption will exceed the Lifeline bracket, but the individual households on this particular piece of land, this compound house structure that we have, will be Lifeline. If you take individual households in this compound house, they will be Lifeline. They'll be the poorest of the poor. But because they use 1 prepaid meter and they live in 1 communal piece of land, say 70 by 100, that's what's typically called a compound house. You enter there, many households put together on 1 piece of land. They would have to pay this 15% too. Again, question is that fair for a country where a significant majority of us are extremely poor and they earn the minimum wage? We'll come to the minimum wage question. They will definitely pay 15% because you are using 1 prepaid meter in a compound house. And if you find a compound house, that's where a significant number of the poor will sit. Go to the statistical service, they tell the story. 20% of dwelling units in Ghana are compound houses. 20%. And that's where you find our poorest citizens in compound houses. 20% of that. And they will be forced now to pay the 15% VAT. Again, once you begin to appreciate this impact on the poor, you need to ask the question, is this a tax that the state should be implementing, particularly at a time like this? That's a fundamental question I'll be asking. Go to the World Bank. Why did we introduce a Lifeline? Because we recognize that there's a group of people who earn the minimum wage, right? And so typically, the Lifeline bracket is for those who earn a minimum wage. We recognize that. And what is a minimum wage? If you earn a minimum wage, then you earn 18 cedis, 15 pesos as your minimum wage a day. In terms of salary at the end of the month, you're talking about 544.5 cedis. That's all you take home. 545 cedis. That's what you take home as a minimum wage. And that's typically what you earn as a Lifeline customer or consumer, according to the World Bank, as I've said already, right? So that's the bracket. But remember, again, go back to my first point, that because government has decided to reduce that bracket down from, in terms of the kilowatt hour, from 50 to 30, we still have a significant number there that will still be Lifeline, which means they'll still be earning minimum wage. Can they afford to pay the full cost of electricity? In addition to that, they'll also now have to pay 15% of VAT on that. Think about that for a second, and the impact that will have on that poor woman who is selling by the roadside, who lives in a compound house. That is a story that begins to emerge when you begin to strip this off a bit more. And then you see the story of well, there's no free lunch. Government spent a lot of money to do free electricity, etc. As you see, over time, they found a way to get us to pay. We have the COVID-19 health levy was introduced. You have the Lifeline bracket truncated and reduced to 30 kilowatts an hour. Quarterly tariff adjustments introduced right now. Now we're talking about imposition of the VAT per that directive. So is this really the killer tax? Well, you can try and answer that question for yourself. But let's have a conversation. Let's go back to the roots of this, which is an act that was passed in 2013, but also then explain why is government deciding to implement it now when government prior have decided not to touch it because of what I've just explained, this impact on people. And we'll also get to talk to the TUC on this. Stay with me. The next 45 minutes, we'll try and get you to understand its impact on you. Will it ever be implemented? Is it even feasible? And what really can the TUC and others do about it? My guest after this. PMS is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Alomo Bitters experience greatness in every moment. Ghana AIDS Commission also. And I always recommend Syntex Tanks to you because no matter your water needs, Syntex Tanks has it all. Syntex Tanks is first to introduce the double layer tank. And now you can have as many layers as you want. Syntex Tanks is first to introduce the white inner layer tanks. And they also have the customer specs. You can just call them. Whatever the size and color, they will have it for you. They have 7 years warranty. Nobody else has that. Call them on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntex Tank, a year strong, a year tough. My guests are joining me now. Joshua Ansah, Deputy General Secretary, Trades Union Congress. Also joining me is Samuel Dubik Mahama. He is the Managing Director of the ECG, and he's in the studio with me. Dennis Asare is a research consultant on energy at the Mani Center for Policy and Education. And I quickly want to start with the TUC on this because yesterday they did a press conference asking government to withdraw this immediately, giving them at least 1 week to do so or else they were going to advise themselves. Mr. Joshua Ansah, since your press conference yesterday, have you been called to sit for dialogue?
Good evening, Evans, and good evening to our channel's listeners. Unfortunately, no. Nobody has called us for any discussions yet.
Are you willing to dialogue on this matter?
Yes, we are willing to dialogue for no buts. We are willing to dialogue for total withdrawal of the document. We are not prepared to accept anything apart from total withdrawal of the VAT because you will not pay, and we cannot pay.
Okay. Please stay with me. I'll come and understand a bit more why you say you won't pay when this is actually from what I...
No problem, Evans.
I'll come back to understand why you say you won't pay when this is law, from what I've been told.
But Evans, before you come back, laws are made for man, and man is not made for the law.
But let's understand. Yes, I'll come to that. I'll come to that for you to expand on that for me. That's where I want. That's where I want to go now, because I have the MD of ECG with me.
Okay.
Mr. Dubig Mahama, on that subject of the law, though, what is the legal basis for this particular VAT on electricity? Because last year, when we all sat here, covered the presentation of the 2024 budget, I don't recall that there was a line in there in the tax handles that says that government was going to impose VAT on electricity, which would have then been approved by Parliament, etc. So what's the legal basis for this?
Well, in 2013, the value-added tax bill was passed, Act 870, which set out the parameters in the first schedule and also sections 35 and 30 to 37 for the places that VAT should be charged on, like a dwelling place and all of that, which makes it mostly commercial and residential places. This has been a very thorny issue since 2013, and its implementation has also actually been a headache. As we are as a nation now, there's a letter that came to ECG requesting this. When you say withdrawal of the letter, as we heard my elder brother say, they said 1st January for implementation. 1st January has passed. The thing is not being implemented. So actually, as I sit here, for me, I had a great interaction with my energy minister today, and we've spoken about it. We've looked at what needs to be done, and conversations are far advanced. If this thing would have been charged this year, by 1st January it would have been charged. Clearly, at where we are now, we are finding whether even the law that was passed, what are the restrictions on the law, if it can be passed. We are finding a couple of interpretations. Don't get me wrong, but if you watch what date is on this document right next to me here.
So this is the 10th of January,
2023.
2023. What document is that?
That is, I asked for a legal opinion from the lawyers for ECG to find out if within the law, if this provision is right, and if in its implementation and what it will mean. So let's not take it for granted to think that even the company ECG or government itself is not taking proactive measures to close this gap and to find a way out of it. If this law has to go back to Parliament for it to be looked at and reconsidered, yes, then so be it. It should be a consensus. So we need to actually applaud the TUC for what they are doing, and then also be clear that if the thing is not being implemented and there's a paragraph, the last paragraph says you should transfer the revenues collected from the implementation of the VAT on the subject matter as a domestic VAT collection. There are processes that need to be outlined. First of all, one of the biggest challenges that will come up is this. Are we charging the VAT on residential customers? If yes, are they on prepaid meters? Yes. So are you charging on prepaid? Are you charging per the money or the consumption? Because with prepaid, consumption is at the end of the day. Your consumption will be known at the end of the day because you are prepaying for something. So I will only know your consumption after you have consumed. So if I charge you the VAT when you're about to pay, that will not be fair if I'm charging on consumption. But at the end of the day, that means that if I'm to implement it at the end of the day, when you're about to purchase again, you actually have a debt that needs to be settled. So all I'll say is there's a lot of stakeholder engagement that has to go into something like this. Because so I see more of this letter as a letter setting in motion an inquiry into all of this.
And this was a clear directive.
It's a directive, but if you're given a directive and there are bottlenecks, you don't go implementing a directive that has bottlenecks. You understand? Every directive allows for conversations to be had. Now, ECG itself, you have to come to ECG to ask ECG, how are you going to implement this? There has to be stakeholder engagements. There has to be some form of sensitization. So if you call this a directive to me, I didn't treat it as a directive. You understand? Yes, it's in the law. So
this is from the finance ministry. So of course the finance minister.
Yes.
Have you communicated this concern to him?
I've had a chat with the finance minister. I've had a chat with my sector minister, the energy minister. We've traded conversations. We've come up with a few things that we've discussed. Because, see, this comes to you with these pointing sections of the law. Immediately, what does that? It brings up a legal issue. It takes it from the ambit of just operating a business. So if it takes it from the ambit of operating the business, I don't also want to fall foul of the law. Because one thing is, this thing was passed in 2013. Nobody has implemented it on any system.
Why do you think that is? Now that you are there, you also
I would say that it is a technical difficulty because it's a nightmare. How do you go about this? I call it a nightmare because the World Bank gave ECG a system called the Commercial Management System, CMS. This system never envisaged growth for ECG's customers. So it locked our customer numbers at about 4 million. So we've kept on, before we decided to do upgrades to our system, we have been putting customers in there that now, there are customers that are missing in there. ECG has now put boots on the ground to do the KYC, as you know, with the tags to know your customer very well, to have the proper customer number. Every tax has to be equitable because everybody across board has to what? Has to pay their fair share. Mm-hmm. You cannot level a tax for just one or two people to pay. Now, the bottlenecks in that system, with the juxtaposed with the different metering softwares for each prepaid meter. Now, how do I input such a tariff and where do I slot it? That's what I'm saying. To implement this is not an overnight thing. And so this actually has given rise for a whole conversation. But now let's ask ourselves this. You read the law with me. Now, the question is, the framers of that law, they need to be asked for clarity. Let's go back for the interpretation. Why did you pass this law?
That's Parliament.
Yeah, why did you...
You said that Parliament passed it?
Parliament passed it. So we need to understand, we need to get their understanding of this before we can go forward.
Based on what you now know, because you've done some work, and I just see this conversation started last year.
Yeah.
You actually commissioned your lawyers to look into this. I'm curious, what did your lawyers say?
If I'm charging VAT on a business, yes, you're using the power to add value. If you're doing, let's say, a business, you live in your home and you're running a business in your home, you should pay VAT because you're using it to add value. Mm. But the lawyers are also saying, if you're living home with your family and all of that, then whoever wrote that law we need to go back to that person to find out what was the mind behind you saying for somebody sitting in their home enjoying electricity, they should pay value added tax. That's it. So the lawyers were saying, look, you need to go back for further interpretation on this because to even implement this, it will be very, very difficult. And I know for a fact that nobody is trying to cause any hardship. So that's why I know this wasn't sent with any malice, and I don't understand why it's calling all of this, because I cannot set this in motion without not going to my regulator, PURC. Mm. You understand?
So just to understand what the lawyers said, that the law as it is now cannot be implemented unless you get that clarity.
Yes, because they are advising the company that you need further clarity on how to implement this. Okay. Because you cannot just get up and implement this in 2 or 3 forms because it has to be uniform across board.
And did they say if you implement it with this current understanding, you may be violating the VAT Act?
They say if you don't implement it, I'm already violating it because I'm not charging it.
Yeah, I know, because the law says do.
Yeah, and you're not doing it. And me not doing it and still keeping my job, I should be thankful to the president for keeping me in my job. Mm. But the truth of the conversation is we need to get further understanding of why this was framed and put in there. Mm. Because, you know, every tax, there's a procedure for tax on the good people of Ghana. So if there's any tax, let's not let it seem like it was smuggled in. It wasn't smuggled in.
And I come back to that. Now you are in charge. You've had some time to now look at the reality and whether or not this is a tax that can be implemented in the form that is currently the law says it is. What's your conclusion? Is it implementable?
The truth of the matter is, at this stage in ECG's life and ECG's career, it will be very difficult to carry this out now.
Why? When you say stage,
apart from broad stakeholder engagements, you need to program systems, you need to configure systems, the software management. It's a whole process. It's a whole process. Even let's say, for example, for tariff. When tariff is adjusted or is moved, what do we do? It's not immediate. If you realize when it happens, some people come to complain that
there's a whole chaos.
Yeah,
this is simple tire that you've been doing over time.
Yeah. And when we went to buy power, this is what happened. And that's what I said. It still goes back to the system that was given to us by the World Bank. So we are trying to go through an upgrade or trying to better the systems we have to get to a point where we can have an understanding of whether or not. But the truth of the matter is this has to go back to source for better clarity, because it's not something that, because the biggest question, that's what I was asking you. How do I do it on a prepaid meter? Because my systems will not allow me to build. So you need to explain, should I do it on the money paid up front, or am I doing it on the, what do you call it? On the, the consumption, which is after the fact, which then means that postpaid customers are the ones. So it's not going to be. Plus,
so again, for clarity, where ECG is now and knowing your systems, you use the wording difficult, but you didn't say impossible.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. I'm still going to use the word difficult because, but I can't blame a system totally, because you can overhaul a system, you can change a system and all of that. But you can also change it overnight. It's going to take a longer time to change all of it. But my question at hand now is this. Oh no, my answer to you is, if it's going to be difficult, it's not that it's impossible. But the question I keep sending you back to is the framers of that particular section of the law.
To be more direct, your systems, as it is now, have not been set up to implement VAT on electricity.
No.
So if you want to do it now, that is impossible.
It's not, I won't say right now, it will be very, very difficult, and it will not provide the equitable nature that a tax is supposed to. It will not provide that equitable nature. And, you know, nobody should implement something, especially when it comes to a tax, and create a burden on just a few group of people while leaving another group of people out. You get what I mean? Because everybody, when you impose a tax, is supposed to cure something. Everybody's supposed to pay their fair share. So how am I going to make sure that, as I said to you, my customer numbers, we are trying to close the gap on that. It's going to be a technical issue, a technical nightmare that is not going to be solved now. It's going to take some time to fix. Okay. Now, brings me back to the matter again. I don't want to politicize this. As I always say on your show, one of the biggest mistakes is to politicize an issue when it comes to energy. And the worst one is to politicize an issue when it comes to tax. My question is, if we can find the back document to this act, we need to understand why this was put there. Was it just put there because we should put it there? Or
a few questions on that. The 2013, the NDC government was in power, so they crafted it.
Let's not do
Parliament.
politics.
I'm coming to a question.
Okay.
I'm coming to a question. Sent to Parliament. Parliament considered it, and Parliament approved it. Parliament passed it. That is done. Nobody, no government since then attempted to implement it. But the finance minister under this government decides to write to you to implement it.
Okay. So
that is a fundamental difference.
So he's written to you, implementation. That's why I like reading the document in whole. When an implementation document is sent to you, the deadline is given to you. The deadline has passed. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
What's the expectation?
You still have to do it.
No, you have to go back and explain.
Yeah, but it is under his watch
Yeah.
that a move was made to implement this task.
What if his move, let me play the devil's advocate here. What if his move is aimed at starting the process to remove this?
But that wasn't the instruction in the letter to you.
But unless you start a process for you to know that probably we need to rethink this position.
The finance minister didn't say, ECG come and sit for a conversation on how to implement.
So he says implement. I wasn't able to implement. I've fallen foul of a directive. I've fallen foul of a lot of... I go back to explain. This is a trigger point for a roundtable discussion as to you were not able to. Now, why do we even know how to charge VAT
Before
on
a finance
residential
minister,
customers?
before a finance minister would write this, the GRA would have had an input. I assume so.
So let me point out.
So the GRA and the finance minister should have known that the ECG structures currently is not being set up to implement this now.
That's what I'm saying. When you have a conversation with people at the round table, it's totally different from a letter that was brought to you. If you have to start a process, how do you start the process? They say, my friend, implement. Everything you start to implement, you have a problem. So you have to go back with your problem and see what the solution is. And I keep telling you, the problem goes back to the law. Let's not and let's try and lay. The finance minister said this one gave you a directive. So if you give me a directive to go kill my mother, I'll go do that. No, he gave me a directive to implement something. The date for implementation has passed. So even the first question is this: did they do any forecast on this money? And what was it estimated to what you are bringing?
Now
if you can show me that, then I would let you. I can also explain to you that yes, then there was a broad stakeholder. But I can tell you for a fact that I don't think there's a forecast for this, because everybody knows for a fact. Everybody, from those who framed it or to everybody who sits around the table, to know for a fact.
You asked the question.
Yeah.
Why do you even want to impose a VAT on residential customers?
Yes.
Explain.
There are certain parts of the world that VAT is paid on residential, and there are certain parts of the world that VAT is not paid on residential. Now, you did a write-up earlier which showed how Lifeline customers moved from here to here, and 50 to 30.
50 to 100 to 50 to 30.
Now,
30 years.
Now, these Lifeline customers, now, if I go into my system, if I go into the system of ECG trying to clean up their data, my question will be, who is a Lifeline customer?
It's defined, it's scientific.
It's scientific, but in Ghana right now, I can say here on authority, who is a Lifeline customer? How many people, even in a kiosk, have air conditioning?
You haven't said on authority, you've just asked the question.
Yeah, no. I'm just telling you. How many people in a kiosk? Don't forget, there are even kiosk estates in Ghana. In a kiosk, have air conditioning, have a microwave. One thing we do to ourselves is the moment you use high consuming gadgets like a microwave, or a blender,
take yourself out of the equation.
Moved yourself.
And as I said, you have 2 bulbs, 1 television.
And it's not possible. You yourself, you knew that thing is not possible. So if all of us have done this, now the question is, maybe at the time of the framing of this, maybe that was it. That was what they were looking at in terms of how we lived. This is 2013. Look at the country now. Look at where we are. Look at how fast we are growing. So now these questions, these are very pertinent questions that this letter seeks to what? Provoke. I don't see why this letter should
Do we still have Lifeline customers under your watch?
My brother, we don't have Lifeline customers right now as I'm speaking to you.
So you're saying that the people now you serve, your consumers can all afford?
Mostly.
Because Lifeline consumers are defined by their economic circumstance.
And those who can't afford are bypassing the meter. But because he still wants to use his gadgets.
And this VAT will actually make that worse.
So that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. This letter, to rather say this letter should be withdrawn, I would say we should rather move it to the point where the law itself should be looked at. Because let's say...
Scrap the law?
Yeah, so let's say...
What do you say? Scrap the law?
The law has to be looked at. I won't say scrap because I won't say I know more than everybody.
Okay, hold on for me.
So let me land one last point. If this letter is pulled back, as he says, is withdrawn, it's not implemented, 10 years, 5 years down the line, what stops another finance minister from bringing this?
Yeah, that's why I asked the question. Now, you've told us a challenge.
Yes.
You say it's going to be a nightmare.
So what if
you should have a view on the law?
What if by that 10 years or 5 years down the line, the challenges are fixed?
Okay. So let me go to Dennis now. Dennis is on the line. Dennis, I deliberately wanted to hear the ECG's view because they will be the implementing agency. Now that you've explained, now we have a better clarity on his own appreciation of the challenges. Yeah. Where do you stand now on the subject of the VAT on the electricity?
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, Evans, and good evening to my co-panelists. I think that Mr. Mahama has eloquently talked about the compliance challenges to this tax. And so it tells you that the prior stakeholder consultations that should have been done towards implementation of this tax were not done. If they were properly consulted, they would have pointed out the technical as well as the regulatory challenges. If you go back to the law, even though it is stated in the law and in the definitions to the VAT Act in 2013, if you look at how they define goods, electricity, thermal, gas, and all of those are captured there. So I think in the framers' idea, they consider electricity as part of the immovable property, and they listed electricity as part of it. But when you come to implementation, Mr. Mahama has showed how technically difficult it would be. But my position is that if you look at the underlying principle behind every energy policy is to ensure that power is affordable. And if you come to our setting, the three main factors that drive our power, our tariff prices, or that drive either the increase or the decline of power prices, are mainly inflation, exchange rate, and the cost of fuel. And for a long time, these variables have been unpredictable. And that is why we have had consistent tariff adjustments. But if you look at other countries that have relatively stable inflation rate and a stable exchange rate, you see that power prices can be very stable over a long period of time. Let me give you an example. Between 2010 and 2020, we've had about 29 tariff reviews, 5 major ones and 24 minor tariff reviews. It tells you that the very factors that drive our power prices are unpredictable. And so anytime you are implementing a policy that will add up to power prices, you must bear in mind that the underlying factors that drive your energy prices are unpredictable. And so the moment these variables go up, you are likely to see tariffs adjusted. Just last year, between January 2023 and December 2023, you see that in the first quarter, tariffs went up by almost 30%. In the second quarter, 18%. In the third quarter, about 4.22%. And the last quarter, just about 1.22%. And if you monitor it clearly, you see that it follows the way the inflation rate, exchange rate, and the cost of fuel have been moving. So it tells you that if you get to another scenario where all these variables are going up, just as we saw last year, you are going to see an increase in the price of tariff. That in addition, you want to impose another tax on this same tariff that is unpredictable, and you have also committed in the IMF program that you are going to consistently do a quarterly adjustment or a quarterly review of your tariffs so that you're able to cover the cost within the system and reduce the revenue shortfalls within the system. So we have committed ourselves to a system where we want to reduce energy sector costs. The variables driving our tariffs are unpredictable. So if you impose an additional tax, you are already setting the consumer ahead of a higher energy prices. Then when these variables change, you further push them even down to a very expensive tariff. Mind you, 43%, almost 45% of our population are multidimensionally poor. One of their deprivations too is electricity. A quarter of our population are in the extreme poverty region. And so imagine that if these were the numbers that we considered to put into bracket something called a lifeline consumer. Today, technically, Mr. Mahama is proving to us that there's actually no lifeline consumer because of gadgets that we are using today and the fact that our consumption have increased. And so the implication is that if people cannot pay, then they'll go the other way of stealing the power. The other point too is that if people cannot pay, they delay payment of their electricity bills. You build a lot of debt or a lot of arrears in the system. Then you have to now go and use ESLA or any other levy to come and pay. So we would be creating, aside the technical challenges, creating extra difficulty for the consumer who already has gone through a lot of economic reform policies that seem not to take care of the ordinary Ghanaian. They've gone through a debt exchange program, inflation is high, cost of borrowing is high, cost of food is high. And so if you think about imposing another VAT on a particular commodity whose predictability is unknown, then it does appear that in the decision making or in arriving to implement this tax, the ordinary Ghanaian was not put into perspective. And so for me, I think that the timing is wrong. And at any point in time, it will be very difficult. And there are even arguments that
what about the fundamental point about the law, though? What do we do with the law? Because the law exists on our books. In fact, when you pull it up,
yes,
it actually includes water,
yes,
too. And so what do we do without law?
So I believe that it's about time, as Mr. Hammer said, we go back to the notes that led to inclusion of these conditions, because in the definitions, when you look at goods, it expands goods so widely that electricity, water, and so tomorrow we can see that this may even go to water. So let's go back and review even our definition of goods that are VATable. And so if we are defining right from the onset, we consider that if electricity is part of goods that are supplied and so should be VATable,
should the law,
then we bring
should the law be amended
into context. Yes.
Should the law be amended to simply take out electricity and water?
I think that will help because you don't have control mostly over the variables that drive up power, the cost of power. And so anytime you are imposing such a tax, what the consumer should be rest assured is that anytime inflation, exchange rate, and the cost of fuel, that's natural gas, goes up, tariff will have to be adjusted upwards, plus this VAT. And so in my mind, in the process of reviewing it, we must consider all of these things before putting in water and electricity, given that most of the consumers of ECG are residential. They have over, I think, about 4.65 million residential consumers, with just less than, I think, 1 million on non-residential and a relatively smaller number in the special load tariff. And so the bulk consumers of electricity in the country, you are making it difficult for them to access. Then that defeats your national electrification policy, where you are trying to solve three main issues: energy availability, accessibility, and affordability.
Well,
and in this case, power will be available,
the issues,
power will be accessible, but very expensive to people.
Yeah, the issues are pretty obvious now, what it is. And now we have some clarity from the ECG2 on it. I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll hear the TUC's view. Now that we've heard the ECG actually almost agree with the TUC on the difficulty that this tax poses to the ECG as they've been asked to implement. Conversations, he says, have started last year, understanding what this is and how can we even implement it. I'll get his thoughts on that when we return. My guest is the MD of ECG. He's in the studio with me, Joshua Ansai, the Deputy General Secretary of the TUC, and Dennis Asare with Imani. Ms. Ansah, you've now heard the ECG explain that this is going to be a nightmare. They actually agree with you that this is going to be difficult to implement. Your reaction to that?
Thank you very much, Evans, and thanks very much for the eloquent way Mr. Mahama explained the issues. He is a labor person, and he knows the suffering of the masses of this in this country. I must be frank with you that and the law, as you are referring to, I think that it must be totally reviewed. And if in reviewing the law, I think that it must be scrapped totally. Why do we elect presidents? Why do we elect government? We elect government in the country to at least take care of the basic needs of the citizenry. What is water? What is electricity? What is housing? What are roads? What are toilets? It is only in Ghana when parliamentarians and government build toilets, they pride themselves that they are built toilets, they are built this, they are built that, and whatever. They are basic necessities where it is their responsibility and duty to ensure that every citizen is taken care of. Ghana, I mean, we have everything in this country that shouldn't have actually put us in this bad state. We are already impoverished. We are already suffering. We are already burdened with a lot of issues. Then we are bringing this killer tax also in addition to electricity bill. I'm happy it has been identified that in Ghana now there's nobody on this Lifeline. I mean, a poor worker who has just begun, let's say an employee who has just been employed. Common radio, a common one bulb and one television and one free tool, that will make his life a little bit better for him. He has to be paying VAT on all these things. Meanwhile, when PURC and the rest are bringing the pricing of the commodity itself. There's already VAT in it.
Yeah.
Because the fuel they
but I need to ask you. I need to ask you because of time. That now that you know that the fundamental challenge is the law.
Yes.
You asked the finance minister to withdraw. Would your strategy tend to Parliament and to government to start the process to review the law?
As TUC, we think that it is a bad directive and it must be withdrawn. And the rest, we leave the rest with the government. It must be withdrawn totally. We will not pay, we will not accept it, we will resist it. And if they know that it is the law that is posing these fundamental problems, the government and the finance minister and whoever thought about it should go back.
Yeah, and I'm just curious. When you heard the ECG explain that it's difficult, it's a nightmare, did it calm you down a bit?
We don't have a problem with ECG.
No, they are the implementing agency.
Yes, mind you, ECG workers are public utility workers, ECG and what are part of organized labor.
Yeah.
So they themselves are suffering. But you cannot insult your father when you are living in your father's house. But the thing is that everybody is suffering, including you, Evans, and including Mr. Mahama himself.
Mr. Mahama
so
is suffering.
It is a bad thing.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes.
What I want to ask Mr. Ansah is, as all union people, Mr. Ansah, I don't see, for me, I can see this letter from your perspective, and I can see this letter too from a different perspective. As I said to Evans earlier, if you ask this to be withdrawn and it's withdrawn, and there's no traction, then it's dead.
Yeah.
What stops another finance minister? Because the law was passed in 2013.
You continue to resist it.
So why don't we use this together to cause for the people, as the guy from Imani
Dennis,
said, as Dennis said, that look, we need to have a stakeholder conversation. Let's have a broader consultation.
Why is it that,
and then agree that.
Mr. Mahama, why is it that the government or the finance minister didn't think it twice to have this engagement before even bringing it this
what shows
always they bring directives? Yes,
Mr. Ansah, your position is wrong because you don't know what happened at the back. So let's not use words like think it twice. Because what if let me play the devil's advocate here. What if this letter was started just to make sure that the law is repealed? Then you would have done a great disservice to whoever.
But is that what it is?
I cannot confirm, but I'm just saying that's what let me play the devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, Mr. Ansah, let's get our facts right.
Mr. Mahama, I'm sorry.
No, let's hear me out for a second.
No, Mr. Mahama, we all read this letter from the finance minister. The finance minister is giving directives. He has even given a date for its implementation. What you are saying is different from somebody who is trying to ginger discussions. This one, he says, I am directing that and this and do that and do that and do that. So it's a complete directive. It's a decision made and they want it to be implemented. So if you don't resist it, tomorrow it's going to also go to water and who knows next. So if the government knows that there are some fundamental mistakes or wrong about the law, please let them go back to the law and let them do what is right.
But it's a simple thing. It's a simple matter he's making, right?
No.
The government passed it.
But
the government is a continuum. Another government comes in and decides to implement. His point is, if it's not implementable, just go and review it.
Fine.
Sure.
What I'm saying is, if you withdraw, what have you done? So finance minister
withdraw and review. Withdraw first, and then you review.
So right now, even me, the question of withdrawal is moot because it was what first. What's today's date?
You understand that it's not been implemented anyway.
Yeah. So my point, Mr. Ansah, let me land this point, and you understand that we are all saying the same thing.
Okay, sir.
Let's. I love the energy. I love the excitement. I love the enthusiasm about this whole thing. It's cost all of us to what? Come and sit down. Let's use this for something positive to understand why it came into being and probably if it should leave, why it should leave.
Well, the government has the ultimate responsibility to fix it if they believe so.
Yes.
It's not Mr. Ansah's job to do so.
So I'm just saying, Mr. Ansah and TUC, of which I am part of, brought it up. You understand? ECG itself has told you about its difficulties if it wants to implement it.
Yes.
The TUC has also spoken about the social aspect of it. So everybody has spoken about it. Now, another part that I want to remind you
briefly
briefly is When you say implement, it doesn't mean that, yes, it's a directive, all right. But not all directives are carried out.
Yeah, you've made that point at the beginning.
Yeah, because if you attempt to...
Finally, before we go, you said you had conversations with the finance minister and energy. What was his thinking? Does he see now the challenges, and is he amenable to withdrawing this and focusing on the bigger picture of the law?
As I said to you, the conversations are being held. There is a policy, and we need to find a way out of this, or if it's going to implement it, this is how it's going to be. So it's a three-pronged thing. But at the end of the day, as I can say to you, the conversations are being had. And as I said to you, today I had a conversation with the energy minister about this. And so conversations are far advanced for us to come up with a directive on the matter.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. This is something that definitely concerns everybody, and at least we have some clarity on the way forward, at least from the ECG's point of view. We see what the finance minister and government believes on this too.